Hello, I'm Friederike from the Cloud Report. At my side is Carsten, CEO from Cloudical.
Morning.
And today we are talking with Sebastian from Kubermatic. But please introduce yourself and tell us about your new name.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sebastian, Sebastian Scheele from Kubermatic, one of the two founders of the company. Potentially you heard our company before we were called Lutze, but now we decided also with open sourcing our software that it's time to change the name and that Kubermatic it's much more transporting the vision what we are believing in, like Kubernetes automation and thinking about day two operation on containers and in the cloud native way.
Cool, you mentioned open sourcing. Some weeks ago you open sourced the core of Kubermatic. Please tell us about that.
We decided now after some years of development, and we see more and more enterprise companies adapting more and more smaller clusters, where we believe from the first day on, it's time to open sourcing our solutions so that we can, that other companies can easily adapt the solution, starting managing a lot of Kubernetes clusters at scale, because when we started the company, we started from the beginning on with the idea we want to build a solution how you can manage hundreds or even thousands of Kubernetes clusters in a scalable way across the cloud provider, but also on-prem up to the edge. And so now we see the reality is going in that direction. So more and more adoption is coming up in that way that users are more and more deploying smaller clusters, but a lot of them. And we think Kubernetes can be help them to manage this fleet of clusters in a scalable way and in a centralized way so that you can really centralize, manage all the clusters across different providers. And so that's the reason why we decided we want to go open source with our solution provide this to the community as well.
Sebastian, when we discussed Kubermatic, you mentioned the term open core. And now you open sourced it. Can you explain the relationship between open coring, if that's the right word, your product, and open sourcing is it? Is it the same? Is there a difference? Is that gradually something that basically adds to each other? How is that to be understood?
Yes, we decided that we will make the core part of Kubernetes so that how you can manage clusters, how you can do day two operation available completely under open source with Apache license available, and building on top an enterprise version. So for enterprise customers with more complex environments, more specific environments, we're providing additional features on top of the open source solution. But the open source solution is completely workable. You can use this to spin up clusters. It's not only that the source code is available, you can download it and you can install it, operate it. And then if you have the requirement to have additional capabilities on top of this, we are providing with our enterprise version on top of this.
Awesome. I have another question which is not discussed upon, but it basically reflects some recent things. I'm pretty sure that you noticed that SUSE said they want to take over Rancher. How does that affect the open source ecosystem from your perspective? I know that Julian, your co-founder, wrote a blog about that. What is your view on those things? Is that benefiting? Is it perhaps a room for Kubermatic to grow into that even more? What is your stance on that?
I mean, from our perspective, we really strongly believe in the power of open source. I think Rancher did a really good job on that side. I think it'll be interesting to see how the adoption or what the new direction with and strategy behind the SUSE acquisition will be, and like how flexible the platform will be, how deeply will it integrate with the operating system. But from our perspective, we still commit to we want to be quite neutral in regards of operating system, cloud providers, and think there needs to be a way how you manage clusters across different environments. Because when we're looking into the reality, especially like in more complex setups in enterprise customers, you typically don't have one single vendor there. So you will have a lot of different operating system, different cloud providers. And I think one of the strongest movement in regards of open source is also that people want to avoid this big vendor lock-in again, what we had in the past already. And that's also something what we want to drive and help. Like, and now with even more being open source on that side, pushing this direction because we strongly believe in the open source. We are really active also on the Kubernetes project. If you look into the CNCF statistic, we are one of the top committer to the Kubernetes projects, and so
you are on number 5, aren't you? If I recall properly, which is an awesome number, an awesome position.
Yes, we're currently, based on the current statistics of the CNCF, we're number 5 of the corporate committers. So that's also one of the reasons why we decided we want to also be have this visibility or provide this commitment to open source also on our product layer, and not only on contributing to upstream community, also that it's really clear our commitment is open source, and also we strongly believe in this freedom of that you can choose the providers and like different kind of solutions that you can put this together depending on where you're coming from, what your existing architecture is, but also where you want to go, and that you're not like heavily locked into one specific environment.
Awesome. There's one more thing that you mentioned and that we wanted to talk about with you. You mentioned the term community. From your perspective, why is it so important to have an open source ecosystem with a strong community behind it? Is that basically adding up to each other? Is that, I don't know, something that is just there, or is that something that you also specifically want to develop there? That kind of community-driven culture in those projects?
I mean, I think there's some strong benefits in regards of community. On the one side, you get more inputs how a specific software solution is used and can be used, so that you don't have like one opinionated way. Potentially there are more ways how to do this. I think Kubernetes shows this quite well. Now it's adapted across all the major cloud providers on-prem and becoming more and more a standard. So I think, and this is only possible because of the community work around this. And if Kubernetes would be owned by one single vendor, I think there's still a lot of politics involved. And that, I think, it's one of the important pieces why like having a neutral government, at least around critical projects, be available, like with CNCF. And I think together, collecting them requirements, collecting use cases and implementing this in a standardized way helps quite a lot, especially on a level like this. I think it would be much more hard only defining like standards on paper, and then every company tries to implement the standard, because we saw this in the past in a lot of different areas that typically then the implementation a little bit are not aligned, and potentially it's even not easy to move from one implementation to another, even if there is a standard definition around this.
So community is basically, from your perspective, some sort of quality assurance, a watchdog actually against some particular interests, so to say. and ultimately a very, very thriving force, right? So that's the way I understood you. And if we talk about community, let's step a little bit back, because one of the questions we wanted to ask you was basically the question: why did you actually choose some community-driven container technology as your business model, as the thing that you want to, conquer the world with, so to say? Why is that?
I was quite early using Docker, and when I had the challenge like how to deploy this on multiple servers, and using like existing technologies never feel like really cloud native or the right way. And then Google announced Kubernetes, and so I was looking into this and start playing around with it, and really saw the capability and the benefit behind this, not only for the Google Cloud, also for other cloud providers. And so we were thinking, okay, that could be an interesting project. What could help how to manage containers. I mean, at that time there were still some other projects out there, or were still out there, but like having was every time the question like, do I use Kubernetes, do I use Docker Swarm, or do I use Mesos?
Those times.
Yeah, exactly. And so we decided, okay, let's start with Kubernetes, because we thought. From our perspective, we really wanted to focus on container workloads, and thought that Kubernetes is the one which can drive this mostly. And luckily, it turns out it was the right choice.
It was the right horse. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. But this is how everything started, and so we decided, okay, we want to do more with it, and what problems can we help to solve for customers to run Kubernetes, because at that time they were more or less the only managed provider was GKE, and we were thinking, okay, we need something on other platforms as well.
Cool.
Kubernetes is now nearly 6 years old, and is developing very fast in a lot of directions. Which direction do you want to provide and to develop any further? Where do you see you and your Kubernetes platform in 3-5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, what we believe from the first day on is the world will be a lot of smaller clusters and not a few big clusters. So one of the big challenges will be how not only, and that's where we build Kubermatic for, how to manage a lot of small clusters across different providers, even up to the edge. But I think the next challenge is really things what are already solved inside of Kubernetes, but what needs now to be solved across multiple clusters. So starting from networking, how do I do networking across clusters with potentially multiple service meshes, and how do I establish connectivity between this? The other one is like identification of services, like how do I connect and identify services which are inside of cluster addressed with like service meshes, but this now needs to be addressed across clusters, and even like I think only relying on certificates will be not enough, because you need to talk to a lot of legacy systems which are potentially only talking user and password things, or even like using IP block list, things like this. And so how can this be play into this game? And then the next big part in the story is like, how do I manage and provision workloads across multiple clusters in a scalable way? Like we have the solved inside of a cluster with different tools, Helm, K-Customize, Kube-Apply, things like this. But now we need to think about how we do this across multiple clusters. And that's the reason why we now open sourcing Kube Carrier, which really helps to manage services across different clusters, so that you can, for example, deploy a database operator in one cluster, and in another cluster you deploying the backend for it, and it can automatically ensure that we get connectivity to the database, and so that you can build layer services on top, so that different teams, you can have a database team who's taking care about the operation of the database, and then have a team who's taking care about providing, for example, WordPress as a service, but they're relying on the database service. So first they want to provision the database, and then they provision their stack, and then they want to provide this in a centralized way to the end customer. So and that could be end customers which are inside of an organization, but also to an external organization. And that's exactly the reason why we built a Kube Carrier, because we strongly believe there needs to be something like a service hub available, how you can provision and centralize, provide the services in and outside of your organization.
We should have a private conversation about that, because that sounds interesting. That sounds really interesting. But not in regard of this interview. I mean, I guess it's going to be interesting, but for a later time. My last question in that regard is basically a little bit based on what you already said, that kind of convergence between different cloud environments, cloud ecosystems, and so on and so forth. Globally speaking, generally speaking, what do you feel like will the cloud world look like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Do we just have some very few vendors, or is it going to be more open? And basically, regardless of what it would look like, how would you position Kubermatic in that regard?
I think on the cloud side, we will have a few big vendors there. I think it's coming out more and more clear that it's like there's room for 4, 5, potentially 6, 7 vendors. But what we strongly believing, which now coming up more and more, is the whole edge topic, how you run workloads inside of a fabric. When you're looking into 5G topics, close to the customers, and I think there Kubernetes can play a big role, especially over like helping to standardize the whole deployment story, helping to automate this operation. Because when you're thinking there about thousands or 10,000s of clusters, and then even like 10,000 or 100,000 of services you need to operate, I think that's only possible with heavily automation. And I think there it will be not only 1 or 2 big cloud providers who can or who will dominate this game. I mean, the cloud providers are in some areas also going now in the direction how they can provide workload on the edge. But I think on the edge there's a lot of more different workloads to target, and also like in the data center. Like I think there's still a lot of room and potential for running Kubernetes in the data center. And so what we strongly believe is like it will be quite distributed and complex environments in the future. And I think one of the big challenges will be how you can manage this whole complexity, like being from a bigger enterprise perspective, being compliant, like ensuring that you can roll out standardized policies to all of your clusters, that you can provide a centralized way how to manage all this ways, and also that you can, when you think about the operation, can build centralized teams, like a centralized container as a service team, and not like thinking every time in silos. And I have a team for this, and I have a team for that, so that you can really leveraging the scalability of Kubernetes and the whole software development. And I think that's a big benefit. And where we would like to see, of course, the cloud provider, that enterprise sees them more like an energy provider. It should be easy to switch them, especially when a lot of stuff is running on top of Kubernetes. So if you have the demand to go to different provider because potentially legacy reasons, pricing reasons, but also potentially you want to go in a specific region where the cloud provider is not available, you want to be flexible and can move around.
That is so true, just from my perspective. Although I'm not the one being interviewed, but that is so true. And the picture is totally right from my perspective. Adding to that, the final question. As Kubermatic, you will always be open, right? Part of your DNA is basically being able to work with most, if not all, ecosystems, right? Is that going to sustain, or do you plan to change that in the future?
No, I mean, that's the reason why we're starting now even be more open and open source. So if we want to change this, we wouldn't do the move now and open sourcing core parts of our software. So we strongly believe in this, and we want to go that direction. And that's the direction for the whole company for the next years, to providing good value to the community and also our customers with the openness of our software, so that they easily can adapt this, and that it's working more or less out of the box. And it's our focus is really about the operation and day two operation, so that it's working really stable in a scalable way.
So basically, you dare to be very open in that regard. Awesome. Sebastian, if Friederike does not have any more questions, I would say thank you for that interview. I feel like we got a lot of insights, right? A lot of very useful information. Thank you for your time. And let me put it that way, for those who are not inside that was our third attempt. So thank you, Sebastian, for your patience and for your collaboration. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and hopefully talk to you soon.
See you.